In 2003, I received a call I won't soon forget. It was my business partner informing me that my fiancé had just been taken by ambulance, and there was no further information. Dozens of tests, doctors, specialists, and MRIs later, nothing. There was no explanation. The only thing we knew is he was having dinner with a friend, had one drink, went into the bathroom, and never came out. But no test could tell us why. He was healthy and laughing one moment, and then blacked out on the floor and being rushed to the hospital in the next. A few months later, I married that amazing, wonderful, handsome, genius of a man. But I have never forgotten how I felt on that day when I received that call. Helpless, panicked, scared I might lose my best friend. When I married Keith, I did so knowing that something like that could happen again at any time. We found out a few years later what was the cause of that blackout, and honestly, it was really no big deal. But I knew from the very start of our marriage that I would not do anything. I would not say anything to him I might later regret. I knew that I would do everything in my power to love him. Love is the nucleus of each of our lives. It is what propels us to greatness. It is what makes this life worth living. It is the first emotion that was showered upon most of us from the moment we entered into the world. Our mothers, fathers, siblings, hospital workers. Immediately following our grand entrance, we were introduced to the strongest emotion there is: love. And then, for some reason, we get married or enter into a long-term relationship, and we allow something to compete with our consistent ability to show our admiration and affection for those we love most. Life. Life happens, debt happens, stress happens, a terrible boss, work, kids, downtown traffic, all of the most challenging and frustrating moments in life. Did I mention downtown traffic? All of these elements of life happen to us, and we forget one very important thing. We can't count on tomorrow. It may never come. The love we share in this moment is the only love we are guaranteed to give. When we argue with those we love most, we make an unwise and presumptive decision. When we slam a door, hang up the phone on someone we love, when we spew hurtful words, we make an assumption that they will later be there to allow us to apologize for our words, to make up for our nasty comments. We assume that they will be on the other side of the door when we decide to open it, or that they will be on the receiving end of the phone when we decide to call again. But what a tragedy it is for those who never get that chance. They spend the remainder of their days playing out that last conversation, those final words, their endless regret. So, Fawn, are you trying to tell us that you and your husband don't argue? Are you trying to tell us, and you want us to believe, that you say what's on your mind, are honest and transparent with each other, and you don't suppress your emotions? Yeah. You do realize that nearly every family therapist and marriage counselor in this room and outside of this room is likely to dispute what you're saying is even possible. I do, for those that just laughed. And that's okay for those over here that just laughed. And here's why. I have lived through what I am about to share with you for the last 12 years of my life, so no one, not even those that laughed, can convince me it doesn't work. There are 3 things that I have used to create my own argument-free marriage that you can replicate in any relationship that you desire to last a lifetime. You ready? I promise it's not going to be a joke. This is real. This is real. The first is to understand and obey the law of acceleration. The second is to stick to the original emotion. And the third is to keep at the forefront of your mind this indisputable fact that tomorrow may never come. I recognized the law of acceleration for the first time about 10 years ago. My husband and I are 2 incredibly strong-willed people with great convictions about what we believe. Sometimes our beliefs are aligned, sometimes they most certainly are not. We have agreed to disagree on more occasions than I can remember, but we always do our best to see the point of each other by the end of the conversation. 99% of the time, this works brilliantly. And then there's that 1% of the time that requires a timeout before one of us says something absolutely boneheaded we'll later regret. The first time this happened was a doozy. I was frustrated with how he handled a situation with my in-laws and just about hit the ceiling. I opened my mouth to say a few words and immediately knew that if I continued in that conversation, I'd be embarking upon the very first argument with my loving husband. Did I mention he's crazy handsome, funny, incredibly wise, the kindest man I've ever known, and if you hear a cheering section over there, it's because he's leading it. Yeah. I knew it wouldn't be worth it. So as quickly as possible, I laced up my tennis shoes and bolted out the front door. I decided I would walk until all of the angry voices in my head had subsided. Throughout, the voices just began getting louder and louder and louder, telling me I was right and Keith was dead wrong. You have every right to be mad, one voice said. You should give that man a piece of your mind, jabbed another. What was going on in that moment is something that I like to refer to as the law of acceleration. Do you remember in 2010 when Toyota had a defect in their cars that caused them to accelerate while the driver was pressing on the brakes? The drivers going at full speed were swerving left and right, trying to dodge cars and bring their cars to a halt before hitting another. Some succeeded, some failed. What the drivers of those Toyotas described as happening is what so often happens to us when our loved ones and spouses do something that hurts, disappoints, or saddens us. Rather than paying attention to the original emotion, that place of vulnerability, we allow the voices in our head to cause us to accelerate. We zoom ahead from hurt to angry, from disappointed to frustrated, from fearful to ready to fight, and from sad to mad. The day of that in-law incident, I knew if I did not get out of that house right then, right there, I was going to lose control. So I kept walking and walking and walking. Let's just say I burned a lot of calories that day. The same year that Toyota was trying to repair its battered image, Rosie O'Donnell attempted to make reparations to her own reputation in a January 25th interview with Oprah Winfrey. Discussing the huge fight between Rosie and Barbara Walters that got her ousted from The View the first time, not the second. Oprah asked, "Do you regret that moment?" What Rosie said next confounded even the talk show queen herself. Rosie said this, "For me, at that moment, if I had been braver, I would have just cried and said, 'You really hurt my feelings.'" Oprah clapped her hands as if having one of her aha moments and said, "That is so interesting that you would say, if I had just been braver, I would have just cried." Because oftentimes crying is seen as the weak thing to do. She then asked Rosie, "Why?" What Rosie said next illustrates the principle of sticking to the original emotion better than anything I could ever hope to say to you today. Rosie said, "Because then you're vulnerable. Then the authentic feeling which I had, which was pain and hurt and rejection, would have come out." Instead, Rosie told Oprah, she'd put on the same armor she'd chosen since she was a child. She shielded her vulnerability and masked her hurt feelings with anger. When we become angry enough to begin arguing, we have allowed the original emotion, which requires our vulnerability, to be covered up by a more aggressive, defensive response. Rather than exposing the softer sides of ourselves, we put up our shields and pull out our verbal swords. We swing left, we swing right, missing the mark every single time. One of the simplest and most powerful books to ever be written is Don't Sweat the Small Stuff by Richard Carlson. When I wrote my first book, The Happy Wives Club, that really is a book, I traveled to 12 countries on 6 continents and interviewed couples happily married 25 years or more. I figured anyone happily married a quarter of a century or more definitely knew the secrets of a great marriage. And I wanted to find out what were the common denominators. For my last interview, I flew to San Francisco, to the home of Chris and Richard Carlson. Sitting in front of their fireplace, Chris shared with us a call she'd gotten early one morning. A little before 6 a.m., Richard boarded a flight in San Francisco, headed for New York to promote one of his books. Most people don't know this because Richard's amazing books live on. But Richard Carlson never got off that plane alive. An athletic, healthy, 45-year-old man said, "I love you" to his bride of 21 years. And the next day, a beautiful, loving mom of 2 became a widow. Just that fast. There I sat, next to the love of my life, just a few years younger than Richard when he died, seated across from Chris as she shared with us the pain of that moment. On the coffee table between us was a book called The Last Lecture, a book written by a 47-year-old professor who, when given just 3 months to live, delivered one of the most powerful lectures you ever want to see. At the end of his talk, he put up a slide that said, "This talk wasn't for you guys. It was for Dylan, Logan, and Chloe, his 3 young children he was leaving behind." Sitting in Richard's chair, looking into my husband's eyes as he listened to Chris's words, and then looking at the last lecture divinely placed on the coffee table between us, there was not a chance in hell I'd ever let a day go by that my husband did not know he is the greatest gift I've ever been given. Toyota's mistake, Oprah's aha moment, and Richard and Chris's final morning together continue to guide every day of my life. And if you haven't figured this out already, if you did not realize I was really just talking to myself up here, this talk isn't for you guys either. It's not just for you. This is a lifelong reminder to myself, my family, my friends, husbands and wives everywhere, and you, to forgive and give as if it were our last opportunity, to love like there's no tomorrow, and if tomorrow comes, love again.